Now that the computer is off, you can now disassemble it, but first take a photo of when it was on so that you know how it looks like. So here we have the cables attached to everything so that you would know if you were missing something. It's very important to document everything. Make sure to remove all forms of metal jewelry so that you don't get electrocuted. So first things first, you have to remove all of the cables that is attached to the computer, especially electric cables. So a little tip is that before disassembling the computer, you have to document everything. You may video and actually take photos of the parts of the computer, so if you mess up, you could look back in your documentation. So here we are actually screwing off the motherboard, but a safety tip is to, when removing the screws, remember to keep the screws on a safe container so that they won't easily get lost. But shown in the video, we just use a phone case, which isn't practical, but we had no choice but to improvise what we had in the time. Most of the time, the screws inside the computer case have been the same type of screw, so it isn't really a big deal if you mix up your screws, but if ever your screws are different, please be sure to separate them properly, especially document it, so that if you ever mess up, you can always look at your footage and redo it. So all that matters is you are just inserting the right type of screw. Though in some parts inside the computer case, they are using a different type of screw. Always keep that in mind. So once we've already removed all the wires, you see here we are actually unscrewing everything to make sure that everything is actually easily removed, because some parts such as the power source, the motherboard, they're actually screwed down to the PC, so you will really not be able to remove them without unscrewing them. So here we're just unscrewing the motherboard and then the optical drive. Now you just have to safely remove the parts of the unscrewed material, but please be gentle because computer parts are very sensitive, and if you probably scratch or even dent one, it's not going to work anymore. So as you can see here, we're showing off the motherboard. Now we're removing the case in order to remove the optical drive. So after removing that, we are actually going back to the motherboard, where you can see you can actually open it with the material that had thermal paste in it, and we're going to show it off right here. But don't forget to be delicate with these devices, because once they're broken, it's quite hard to fix them, and you'd probably have to buy a new one, which is quite pricey. So here we just documented the computer before and after the disassembling, and now we're on to assembling. So to be honest, it's not really that hard. All you have to do is retrace your steps, but the main concern of this is that you must remember all of your screws, but this is why we have documentation, one of the most important parts of disassembling and assembling a computer, especially if you aren't the most knowledgeable or you're doing this for practice. So here we're just retracing our steps and putting the RAM, the motherboard, the expansion cards, everything back to the way it was. As you can see, they're not struggling because all they did was redo the steps that they did. So of course you'd also want to be careful with these things, because you could accidentally push it a little too hard and it might get damaged, which could also result in the PC not working properly. So just please take your time, no one's going to be rushing you. So here we're just screwing it again. Make sure the screws are tight, of course, because the computer will actually not work properly if one of the screws aren't really attached. So yeah, we're just gonna be putting everything back to the way it was. So in the entirety of disassembling the PC, you'd want to remove most of the cables, but there's actually an exhaust fan that we didn't remove because we didn't deem it necessary to remove. But yeah, all you just have to do is completely remove all of the wires that are attached to the computer, and here's a reference that we have. We took a photo of it because we don't really want to be screwing up, so time to put everything back to the way it was. So now we're screwing on back everything properly, and actually we had some loose wires, and as you can see, me and my group mates were struggling because we forgot where we put it, but thankfully we had a documentation, so it really is the most important step to have a document of what the PC looked before and after. So now that you're done reassembling it, it's time to put on the case. So here we're just putting back the case on, the lid. Okay, now that everything's done, it's time to plug all the electrical wires back in, the peripherals, so that we can make the computer start up. So now me and my group mates are just plugging everything in, plugging in the power source. And as you can see, it actually turned on, so that was a good sign. And now we just press it and wait for the computer to boot up. And now as you can see, it says starting Windows. And you're probably wondering, oh, the computer is already working, but it still hasn't looked like the photo that we took in the beginning, so we have to wait it out. So it's a good sign we can see the mouse, but we haven't tested it. Okay, it's loading up. And as you can see, it looks identical to what we had.